Welcome to the ODUBlitz.com football show. We're presented by our sponsors, Lionbridge Financial Advisors. They have locations in Virginia Beach and Newport News. I'm Ed Miller, the ODU beat writer for the Virginian-Pilot. I'm joined by columnist Harry Minium, who just got back into town.
I did. I spent the last day and a half in Lynchburg. Now, what was I doing in Lynchburg? Visiting Liberty University, which upset Baylor 48-45. I'd planned this trip earlier because I had actually gotten a mailer in the Virginian-Pilot, which if you get your Sunday Virginian-Pilot, you get a lot of good ads in it. It was a mailer from Liberty, and it showed all their athletic facilities they had built. They had built $200 million worth of athletic facilities in the last 7 years. So I went up there, I checked it out, a $30 million indoor football workout facility. It's just amazing, and I'll have that story in Friday's newspaper. I also have a video from Lynchburg. Last week, ODU defeats Albany 31-17. Judging from the comments online, some of the ODU fans are in panic mode. What were your thoughts on the game?
Yeah, it's never too early to panic. I'm not
That's
kidding.
Right.
Yeah, it wasn't everything they wanted in an opener. Certainly, they got the win, which was obviously the bottom line. Some things I think they were disappointed in the lack of production in the running game, the offense in general. It was a rainy night. It was a little windy on the field. Conditions weren't so good. So they struggled a bit. And in the second half, defensively, Albany made it a little closer than I think most people would have thought. But they pulled it out. Blake LaRussa played reasonably well. I thought, they lost Ray Lowry to a hamstring injury. He's supposed to be back this week. Uncharacteristically, ODU had 3 turnovers. Yeah. As Bobby Wilder said, he couldn't remember the last time they lost the turnover battle by 2 and won the game. Harry, you were there. What are your thoughts?
Well, the first thing is it's time for fans to chill out. It was the first game. They have struggled against the FCS teams in the past, although they've not played one as good as Albany. I think Albany's a pretty good team. Not overly talented, but very physical and well coached. Not big, but they're a very disciplined team. I thought Blake LaRussa, I thought he played pretty well for a guy making his first start. He didn't play a whole lot of meaningful minutes last year. He had a bad interception. He had an interception that was the fault of a tailback who didn't catch a blitzing linebacker. But I thought he played well. I thought the linebackers played reasonably well, and that was the other big question mark. They made some tackles 6 and 7 yards down the field, and they made some tackles at the line of scrimmage. The defensive backs were really good. The defensive line was really good. The offensive line was not. I mean, that's a big question mark for them as the season goes. As you wrote earlier this week, they've got to get better. Yeah,
they had a not as good a day as they wanted after talking all preseason about wanting to ramp up the running game. So they were in there Monday on a day off for a couple hours on their own, trying to get better. I was at practice today. The running game was still, Jeremy Cox was running really hard. It's a tough defense to run against. You talk about the ODU defensive front, they're pretty good. And after a while, you kind of know what's coming, too. So it's sometimes in practice, it's hard to gauge what you're going to do on a game day.
And one other thing that happened, they sold out their 55th game in a row, and there were a lot of empty seats there. But I thought it was a pretty good crowd considering it rained all the night before. It was predicted to rain all day. And it looked like, I don't know, maybe 15,000 people there. Yeah. A lot of empty seats in the student section, but of course at the end of the game there were maybe 500 people.
Yeah, easy for us. We're sitting in the press box. So I don't criticize people for leaving when they're sitting out there in the rain. But yeah, the bottom line was, again, they sold it out and, move on to the next one.
Well, this week, Old Dominion travels to UMass, and of course last year the game with UMass in Norfolk was moved to Friday night because of Hurricane Matthew. And hurricanes are very much in the news these days, as we know. Praying for all the people in Florida. I hope everyone's okay there. At last year's game, Old Dominion won 36-16. It was a relatively close game. It wasn't decided until midway through the fourth quarter. A very physical game. UMass has FBS linemen. They're very physical. Last year they were not accustomed to the humidity here. Right. And they had, it must have been at least a dozen guys who cramped up. The game just took forever. You've looked at UMass. What are your thoughts on them and how good they are this year?
they've lost a couple of fairly close games at Hawaii, or not at Hawaii. Hawaii came to them, and then at Coastal Carolina. They're an offensively oriented bunch. Mark Whipple, who's been the coach, he was their coach there when they were in the CAA, or maybe it was even the Atlantic 10 back in the day. Very offensive-minded guy. They do a lot of things with formations, some creative things. Their quarterback, Andrew Ford, is thrown for 3,000 yards in his career over the last 12, 13 games. They have a tight end, Mark Brenneman, who's considered to be an NFL prospect. He's transferred from Penn State. Really good player. Through 2 games, he's already got 300 yards receiving, so he's a guy they go to quite a lot. Andy Isabella is a receiver who's another big part of their passing game. They do seem to be rather pass-oriented. Defensively, they've obviously given up some points. 38 points each of the last 2 weeks to Hawaii and down at Coastal Carolina, which is if I'm not mistaken, is a transitional.
They are.
Team.
They're a Big South team that's joining the Sun Belt Conference, and this is their transition year, so they're ineligible for a bowl game. It must have been a disheartening loss for UMass to lose at someone just entering FBS, because I believe UMass has been in FBS like 5 years now.
Yeah, UMass, I think 2012 was their first year, and this is their second year going it alone as an independent, which is kind of a lonely road for a team like UMass, and something I'm going to write about in Thursday's paper about just the struggles of being an independent, unlike, say, Army, Notre Dame, BYU, or Liberty. They don't really have a niche. They're kind of out there on their own, but they figure it's, with conference realignment slowing down at the moment, they're going to try to make a go of it. So yeah, it was a disheartening loss. When you look at their schedule, they need to pick up wins where they can get them. I think Coastal Carolina was one they certainly wanted to have.
Yeah, I think they really anticipated starting 2-0, beating Hawaii and Coastal. So it'll be interesting to see whether how their spirits will be in this game, because this is also a game that I think they consider winnable, more so than some of their teams down the road. But last year's game was significant for ODU because it was ODU's, I believe, their 3rd win in a row. They went to 4-2. And they beat UMass by more points than Florida, Mississippi State, and Boston College last year. So that was just kind of an early indication that Old Dominion might have a pretty good season.
Yeah, we'll get another indication. They go on the road. We'll see how ODU responds. Everybody wants to get on that plane, get on the travel squad, the 70-man squad. They played 57 players last week, so
which is a lot of guys.
Yeah, and a lot. I think Bobby said there are 17 new guys playing in their first game. So yeah, they've got some depth, and from what I've been told, the stadium up there is a lot like Foreman Field. It's smaller,
old.
It's not
lacks creature comforts.
Right. It's not the most comfortable place in college football, and as Bobby Wilder said, the fans are right on top of you, which can, depending on how many show up. I think the early forecast is for rain up there, but
and this doesn't quite. It's not quite a must-win for ODU,
right?
But it's a win they really need. They obviously their first goal is to win the Conference USA, but their second goal is to go to a bowl. And with North Carolina and Virginia Tech coming up, you don't want to start 1-4 and then go into 1-3 and then go into your bye week.
Yeah, then you've got to win 5 of your next 8, if my math is right. 5 of your next 8, which could be challenging as they get into conference play. And speaking of Conference USA, which we like to touch on, not the best opening week for the CUSA folks. I think they won 1 game against FBS competition, which was Marshall. They beat some FCS teams, and they got it handed to them quite a bit against some P5s and even against a couple of Group of 5s.
Yeah, I mean, there's a Sports Illustrated writer. She wrote a really good profile on Lane Kiffin. She went to Boca Raton and spent a couple of days with him, and she referred to Conference USA is an FBS backwater, and that's not how you want the national media, that's not how you want them perceiving your conference. Last week the conference was 0-4, or the last 2 weeks they were 0-4 against Power 5 schools. FAU looked pretty bad and lost to Navy, which is a good team. So I mean, but they didn't look good. FIU, which of course Florida International, which I said is going to be a surprise team in Conference USA. They get a fairly middle of the road Central Florida team and just get crushed. So
yeah. Did anybody call you about that? Did you hear from anybody? Maybe at Old Dominion?
Yes, I did. Eric Bohannon, their sports information director, called me to give me a hard time about that.
So nice of Eric to do that. Yes. He's a thoughtful guy.
But I think, Marshall beating Miami of Ohio, that was pretty impressive. Miami, Ohio's they've got a good program.
Yeah. Yeah, Marshall, as I wrote in my power ratings this week, upheld the honor of Conference USA, if you will. The Thundering Herd got it done. We are doing these power ratings this year, so log on to ODUBlitz.com and you can see them there.
And you can get all our coverage at ODUBlitz.com. It's the only place you need to go for ODU football.
Yeah, we didn't have a lot of movement. Western Kentucky is still at the top. We got Louisiana Tech, ODU. Those top three are pretty solid. Western has a good opportunity this week at Illinois. I think they're an 8-point favorite going out there in the early line. Louisiana Tech has Mississippi State coming to Ruston, which should be interesting. I know they're going to be looking forward to that down in at La Tech. Then after ODU, Middle Tennessee, which is coming off a kind of a disappointing loss to Vanderbilt. I think they really thought they'd be more competitive. Yeah. They weren't. Their quarterback, Brent Stockstill, was asked what he could take out of that game, and he basically said nothing. It was embarrassing. We played terrible. So they go to Syracuse this week, which is no easy trip either.
Well, let's go down the list of Power 5 schools this week Conference USA is playing. Charlotte goes to Kansas State, Florida Atlantic at Wisconsin, Middle Tennessee at Syracuse, Marshall at NC State, Texas San Antonio at Baylor, which will be spoiling for a victory after losing to Liberty, and Western Kentucky is at Illinois. You notice a trend there? Virtually all of them on the road. Louisiana.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The only one, La Tech, as I said, is got Mississippi State coming in. And of course, Southern Miss had Kentucky at home last week, didn't get it done.
But they came close.
Yeah, Middle had Vandy at their place, couldn't get it done. There's some chances there. I think, like I said, the Syracuse game's going to be tough. Scott Schaefer, who's the Middle Tennessee defensive coordinator, is a former head coach at Syracuse, and apparently he has got the team ready to go, and he's promised he'll be their friends for life if they beat the Orange. The Baylor game is interesting. Interesting to see if they'll cancel class at UTSA if they beat Baylor, as Liberty did. I'm thinking they probably won't, but someone's got to beat a P5. I think Illinois is a P5. Technically, I think they're still in the Big Ten, right?
They are.
Okay, so and then we've got UAB at Ball State, which is a good test for the Blazers. They opened with a really nice. You got to kind of feel for UAB. They had 45,000 people.
Almost 45,000 people.
And they beat Alabama A&M, I believe, 38-7. Now they step it up against Ball State, which is, I think, David Letterman's
It is
alma
David
mater.
Letterman's alma mater.
So we know which way he'll be going. But yeah, good test after an emotional day in Birmingham.
Yeah, and I watched some of the game on Twitter. All the games on Stadium are on Twitter, so I was just watching Saturday afternoon, and it was a pretty emotional day in Birmingham. The crowd was really into it. The players were into it. There were a lot of tears. I mean, if you all recall, in 2014, Ray Watts, the president, announced that the program is shutting down because of financial losses, and it had been rumored for weeks, and UAB officials had been denying it. And then there was just an outpouring of rage from the media and from the fans, and then a fundraising effort, and UAB was forced to reverse field about 8 months later. And so this was, we'll see how UAB does. We'll see if this support continues, if they, this is a great start for them, but we'll just have to see, if the fans continue to turn out there and if they can win some FBS games. And
if it makes them feel better, I did move them up in my power ratings. They're no longer 14th. I moved them up a spot. You had to kind of start them at 14th because you didn't know what you were going to see. And of course, Charlotte's in the basement this week.
Charlotte laid a big egg at Eastern Michigan.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Ed, ODU travels to UMass this weekend. What's your prediction?
I think this is a game they can win. I think it'll be close. I think ODU, I believe, is the last time I looked about a 3-point favorite, which seems about right. I would expect something, they scored 31 on Albany. If they can get there again, or maybe a little more, maybe somewhere in the 38 to 28 range, I would think, if they can produce some points. I think UMass is gonna put some points on the board. It'd be interesting to see how UMass handles ODU's pass rush, which
Albany couldn't handle.
Albany was not a throwing team. They think they attempted 31 passes and were sacked 7 times. That's an incredible ratio. So look for those guys to tee off again.
It'll also be interesting to see how the offensive line plays against UMass, which is a physical offensive line, because they have to, if Old Dominion's going to be competitive next week against North Carolina, which is, in my opinion, the biggest home game Old Dominion's ever played, they have to show it this week. I mean, they have to block better than they did. Yeah.
Well, Harry, I stuck my neck out and made a prediction. My prediction last week in the paper about the Albany game was absolutely terrible. I think I had. What did you? I think I had ODU winning by 38, which was ridiculous. But
that was my pregame prediction. I think I had 31. So we were both.
I mean, it could have gone that way. When they're up 21-3, you're sort of thinking, okay. But to Albany's credit, they kept playing and they played hard. So how do you see the UMass game?
I'm predicting ODU 24, UMass 17. I think this is a game they could lose, but I think it's a game they'll probably win. Now, you lived in Massachusetts, and I lived in Rhode Island. We all know the weather's a little different there than it is here. Yeah. Do you think that it was a factor? Obviously, weather was a factor in the game last year. Do you think it'll be a factor this year?
I checked last night. I think it was calling for mid-60s and rain, which, it's not pleasant. But it shouldn't be, which is sort of what it was last Saturday, maybe a little bit warmer. I don't think it'll be a huge factor. I mean, if they're going up there in November, you'd never know. But, Bobby Wilder will be ready for it. He grew up in Maine.
That's
Brian
true.
Scott, all those guys, they'll be out there in shirt sleeves.
Ron Wickham.
Yeah, Ron Wickham. That doesn't faze them at all. And I presumably will be in the press box, so I'll be warm.
Yeah, and I understand it is an austere press box. So
we're used to that.
Yes,
That's Foreman Field. We are very used to we're used to austere conditions, but nevertheless. Foreman Field's got its own charms for sure.
It does.
I think that'll do it for us. Harry, it was great. Glad you made it back from Lynchburg again, and look forward to reading your story. And thanks everybody for watching the ODUBlitz show. We're brought to you by our sponsors, Lions Bridge Financial Advisors, and they are located in Virginia Beach and in Newport News if you're on the peninsula.
And thank you very much for your sponsorship. We appreciate it.
Yes, we certainly do. If you got any questions, comments, criticisms of the show, we'd love to hear it. We've got very thick skin. We're not afraid to take our medicine. Again,
speak for yourself.
Exactly. So we'll see you again the same time next week.
See you later.